Vice Chair Clausen,
Here.
Representative Fortner,
Here.
Representative Heiner,
Here.
Representative Larson,
Here.
Representative Western,
Here.
Representative Worf,
Here.
Representative Winter,
Here.
Chairman Eklund,
Here,
all present.
thank you. So
And
community-
Mr. Chairman, you are now.
Okay, we are live.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Should ask that before we called roll. So our first bill for consideration is Senate File 157. And I think the sponsor is here. I would like for him to walk us through the bill. And I would like for the committee to listen closely, see if there's any way we can anything we can do to help a difficult process along and maybe find compromises. So,
All right. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman. Good morning, committee. Senator Beitman from Sheridan County. I bring you Senate File 157, property rights, limitation on local authority. This is probably going to be the most important property rights bill you're going to see this session. I ask for your favorable vote to protect private property from governmental overreach. Basically, the focus of this bill can be summed up in one sentence. You can't restrict private property rights by sewer connection. I know you're probably thinking, what in the world are we doing here talking about sewers at 7 o'clock in the morning in ag? But here we go. On page 1 of the bill, you'll see on we're going into 15.7.101. Paragraph B, notwithstanding any provision of this title, no city or town shall condition the provision of any public improvement under subsection A of this section on the inclusion of deed restrictions on a property or properties that restrict uses that are allowed under applicable zoning regulations. Nothing herein shall contravene the discretion of cities and towns to deny connection to the municipal sewage system for utility reasons. So here's the problem the bill addresses. Imagine you have some old pasture that is close to town. The land has always been planned for single family, free market homes and for family estate reasons. It's time to develop those acres. There's only one sewer plant in town and the plant's owned by the town. But the town would rather dictate a different type of home on your land than what you see fit and what your plans are. In fact, they'd like to say who can live there, at what price, and how much the homeowner can make and how much their spouse can make. So the town withholds permission to connect to the sewer plant, and as a result, you lose your property rights and can't build those single-family homes that you're looking at. That is restricting private property rights by sewer connection. So, and you might hear today that towns need freedom to develop unique solutions to restrict property rights, I ask. Just the fact that a town is fighting this bill so hard means that the town wants freedom to restrict property rights by sewer. I ask for your favorable vote in passing this important piece of legislation. And I will point out on the engrossed copy that you're working with, we did amend this pretty good in the House on the Senate side. It originally contemplated counties. We took counties out. We added some amendments to just make the bill just a better bill and more concise and to the point. So I believe that's all I have. I'll stand for any questions that the committee may have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
committee questions for Senator Beitman. Yes, Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. and Thank you, Senator, for being here. Could you explain to us why you took the county out that was originally in the bill?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Heiner, or Representative Heiner, it was just not applicable to this current situation. That's you'll hear from testimony here right quick about the situation that's going on and the remedy for that situation. And so the county was not needed at this time. So took it out of the bill.
Yep, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr.
Representative
Chairman.
Heiner.
Senator, could you envision a situation or scenario where the county could impose restrictions in similar fashion in the future?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, yes, we're seeing, not so much from the counties now, but obviously when when there, anytime you have an opportunity for people to overreach, there's going to be that opportunity. So we just kind of go on the hope that they don't, and we'll address it as needed.
Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's so many times in the process that I'm seeing here in legislature that we're leaving the judicial process out. We're just injecting laws in top of more laws. Is this one of those cases? Has this been litigated, or is there any chance of this getting litigated in the courts in your district or in the district of the person that's wanting the body that's wanting to change these laws, add more laws on top of what we've already had? Because we've seen it in the racehorse deal upstairs just this last couple of days. So we've seen it. I've seen it numerous times, and I'm sort of in awe, thinking, well, we got a court system set up, but we're not using it. We're just injecting more laws on top of more laws. And to me, that's disturbing because we got a process in place already. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator.
Mr. Chairman, to address that, I think what this situation has brought to light is the need to kind of put a little bit of reins on what we've given the cities, towns, and counties a lot of power, a lot of leeway, for good reason. We like our local control, right? But when that control gets abused to the point where they're devaluing and infringing upon your private property rights, it's our duty as a legislature to step in and fix that. So we've given them that authority. Now we may need to put some sideboards on that authority to make sure that they're not infringing upon our constituents' rights. Of course, there's a role for the courts to play, but lawmaking needs to happen in this body.
I guess what I would add also is occasionally we're brought in to even the playing field on some things and to try to avoid a lot of expense with legal court cases and what have you. Any further questions, committee?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Representative Wharf.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I guess I would like to hear a little bit more about what restrictions the town's trying to put on the development that we're trying to address. Because you mentioned some things to me that I don't understand how that's applicable to sewer. Can you expand a little bit on that for me?
So Senator, would you rather do that, or would you want to bring it in with the testimony? We'll have testimony from both sides.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to say, but wait, there's more. And so I
Yeah.
prefer to defer that to you'll hear a compelling story from an affected landowner, and I want her to be able to, she drove a long ways to be here today, and I want her to be able to tell her story.
Yes,
And I'll stand for questions afterwards if you need.
yeah, stick around and we'll kind of do it that way. I think we'll get a more effective testimony from both sides, having them come up and tell us what's happened. So we will start with Mrs. Gill. She's the affected landowner. Come on up and state your whole name and tell us your story.
Chairman Eklund, members of the House Ag Committee, Nikki Gill, landowner. First, thank you for listening. I'm a fifth-generation Wyoming rancher and landowner, a proud rancher's daughter. We've worked our land for over 93 years raising cattle. As well, with my sister, I own a small business that serves our Wyoming beef, along with some very good homemade ice cream at the Jackson Drugstore on the town square. I've had the good luck to work as an intern for our former Senator Enzi, and I have great respect for the legislative work you do as fellow citizens to serve. Thank you for protecting Wyoming. Landowners need you. SF 157 is in your committee today because private property rights are threatened by what I would call sewer pipe overreach. We have 26 acres of ranch land in the county that the county has approved for development for single-family homes. That land has been zoned that way for nearly 3 decades. The land is located in the county, not the town. The county requires connecting to the town's sewer system. We want to do that. We said we would. We need to connect those homes to the town's sewer system. So we asked the town if they would allow us to connect. We did not expect any issues. After all, the homes have been in the service area for the sewer system since the 1990s. And the future homes on our land were previously counted for federal grants to justify the need for capacity expansion. The treatment plant also has the capacity for these homes. But to our surprise, after we asked for permission to connect the free market homes, we learned that the town doesn't want single-family free market homes in the county on our private property. It turns out that the town doesn't like that the county is allowing to develop these homes, but the town has no zoning authority over our land. They do, however, own the community's only sewer system, and we are required to connect to it. And so since last October, they have delayed and muddied a simple request for permission to connect, and they are putting us over a barrel because they do not like the fact we can develop single-family homes on our land, and that using a sewer pipe to control uses, using a sewer pipe to try and get uses on our land they wish they had, rather than the uses that currently exist. The town of Jackson has said they have sole discretion, municipal sovereignty, whether there is capacity or not. Jackson is defending the indefensible, using mythical municipal sovereignty as rationale to control uses on private property outside of their jurisdiction. SF 157 is supported by the Wyoming Stockholders Association, the Wyoming Farm Bureau, and the Wyoming Association of Realtors. I am so grateful to each of these organizations who you will hear from today. Please vote yes on this very important bill, and thank you for your time. I stand for any questions.
Committee questions for Ms. Gill. Okay,
Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman, would this
go
be an
ahead.
appropriate time to ask the question that I asked?
yeah, I think so.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Gill, could you kind of go into a little bit, keep talking about how they're restricting the development? How have they restricted that development based on the sewer capacity? Could you go a little bit more in depth for me, please?
Chairman, Representative, thank you for the question. We have been told that they would prefer to have deed restricted, price reduced homes in place of the free market homes that are currently legally allowed and legally zoned for. And so they're using the sewer system to force deed restricted homes on the county property.
Representative Heiner.
Follow it?
Oh, follow up.
Follow-up.
I'm sorry. Representative
Could you
Warford.
please explain the difference between the two? For those of us that may not understand the difference between the free market homes and the direction you feel they're trying to force you into, please?
Chairman, Representative, sorry, I've been living this, so I understand it a lot better. And so I apologize for that. The deed restricted homes are price reduced homes, and they're typically in Jackson and Teton County under the government's control of how much that land can sell for, how much it can resale for, a cap on how much the individual buying the home can earn as well as their spouse. So they are price reduced homes, and it devalues the property. So it'd be a devaluation of our property in order to receive a hookup.
Thank you, Madam
Okay.
or Mr. Chair.
Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Gill, could you explain some of the attempts you've made to mitigate this or come to consensus with the town prior to coming here?
Chairman, Representative, we have approached the town. We submitted a request for sewer hookup back in October and didn't receive any communication for a couple months. And we were told after, I think it was between 4 and 8 weeks, that we submitted the wrong request. And even though it's the same request that our engineers have always submitted. And so we've been dragged along, and it has been very hard to meet with the staff and the representatives of the town of Jackson.
Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Gill, have you attempted any litigation or any legal recourse?
Chairman, Representative, we are really hoping it doesn't come to that. That would be a huge financial burden to my family. It would simply require funds that we don't have to protect rights that we currently possess on our land.
Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The single-family home concept, would the piping be for the sewer be big enough to do a multifamily home later on in case the single family moved out? Is that what the county is looking at, is down the road, the bigger, more people per residence needing bigger line? Could that be a factor?
Chairman, Representative, there is enough capacity down the road. In fact, the town of Jackson and the county hired a firm out of Berkeley, California to plan not only this area, but property further south for a much denser development that would hook up to town water and sewer.
Representative Fortner.
Have you talked with the county extensively about maybe meeting them halfway, doing a pipe that's maybe in between the size? You're doing a 4-inch, a 6-inch, or 2-inch and a 6-inch, or I don't know what the requirements are. Is there any way you guys can come to a compromise on that, or no?
Chairman, Representative, the pipeline actually runs through our ranch currently, and it was granted to the town, an easement was granted by my grandfather to the town of Jackson for the sewer pipe for free when it went in. So there is a pipe that currently exists on our ranch that runs all the way through from the town of Jackson through our ranch to the sewer plant that has enough capacity for this development plus future density.
Was there ever an agreement when the easement was set up to be able to hook into this line that the city has running through your ranch?
Chairman, I believe it was more of a handshake agreement.
Okay. Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Gill, could you explain a little bit, maybe if you know, what relationship the county commissioners have with the city authorities? And have they been trying to make any deals or concessions or trying to work things out for your benefit or for the benefit of any other person that might want to do this?
Chairman, Representative, I do not believe so. To my knowledge, I am not sure that there has been any agreement or any effort made, but I'm not entirely sure.
If there aren't any more questions, you'll be around. Oh, we do have one more. Go ahead. Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Gill, so if I understand you correctly, you're saying you guys have applied to hook up to the town's infrastructure, specifically your sewer systems, and you have been denied. Do I understand that correctly?
Chairman, Representative, we have not yet been denied. We have been delayed and delayed and delayed. And there is an effort being made to prolong this process, making the process the punishment for my family and for our land and holding it in limbo.
Representative Cyrus.
Mr.
Go
Chairman,
ahead.
Ms. Gill, as the developer, have you offered up a certain amount of this land for affordable housing by acreage or by units? And if so, how much?
Chairman, Representative, so aside from this 26 acres that's in question that we have zoned and has been zoned suburban for 26 years, roughly a year ago, we proposed another rezone request for 74 acres of our land. In that proposal, we offered 65% of those lots to be permanently deed restricted. 90 of those 200 were donated for free by my family to the Habitat for Humanity and the Jacksonville Housing Trust. That proposal was denied by the county commissioners unanimously.
Why? Do you have, I mean, there must, well, maybe they'll be here to represent why that decision was made. We'll get to that later on. So I guess, just so I'm clear, what are the restrictions that have been placed on your development in order to hook up to the sewer? You mentioned deed restrictions, and I think there's some others, and I didn't get them all written down, so.
Chairman, that is the main point, is that deed
Okay.
restriction is what they want to put on the land rather than allowing it to be 84 units of free market. They are holding us over a barrel, asking us to provide deed restrictions, even though the zoning and the land development regulations do not require it.
Okay, what are those restrictions that are on the deed? The deed restrictions that the city requires of the development?
Chairman, the deed restrictions are devalued lots. That would be the restriction, is selling lots at a discount.
Okay. All right. Any Representative Western?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Gill, so let's say this application is denied, took up to this infrastructure. What is the reapplication process like? And what does that timeline look like?
Chairman, Representative, I'm not sure about the timeline of reapplying for a sewer hookup. Our sketch plan approval by the county has a 2-year time limit. So that is banked for 2 years. After that, the sketch plan approval of our development no longer exists. And then we would have to reapply for a sketch plan approval from the county. There was another question in there and I forgot what it was.
Go ahead, Cyrus.
Mr. Chairman. Ms. Gill, just for the record and for the committee and for folks that are watching, could you walk us through what exactly a sketch plan is and what the process looks like for that to be approved?
Sure, Chairman, Representative. This may be a little bit out of my wheelhouse, even though I was part of it, but I'll give you my dumbed down version from my understanding. So you submit a concept development plan or sketch plan of roughly how many units, roughly the layout and the density. And we didn't ask for anything above and beyond what we were currently legally zoned, what we were legally allowed. So there were no other asks. There were conditions put on our approval by the county commissioners, which we agreed with, one of which was a requirement to connect to town water and sewer. And so that was approved. And after the sketch plan approval, then you go into development plan, which is much more intense. It's much more detailed. And in order to get to that phase, we have to have a letter of intent to allow us to hook up to municipal water and sewer.
Okay. Well, I think okay. Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just a couple questions. Are you required to be annexed by the city if this goes forward, or is that just a question?
Sure. Chairman, Representative, in order to be annexed, you have to have permission from the landowner. And we would need to get further along in the process to have that.
Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Are you considering smaller lots then if their requirement keeps going forward? Is that a possibility?
Chairman, Representative, we proposed smaller lots in our previous rezone request. So that has been proposed. As far as this development, we prefer for it to stay as it's currently zoned. We've planned using that land and that zoning. It's been there for nearly 30 years. It's been a huge part of our estate planning process. Like many ranchers in this state, we've relied on that density and those entitlements to be able to pass the ranch on to our next generation.
Okay. Representative Western.
Mr. Chairman. Ms. Gill, is the proposed development within the service area of the sewer system?
Chairman, Representative, it is.
Okay. All right. We'll be around for more questions. And thank you for your testimony. I guess next I'd like to hear from the city of Jackson or representatives that have, I understand they're here. Come on up, sir. Both of you.
Thanks you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Matt Hall. I'm the mayor of the city of Cody and the president of the Wyoming Association of Municipalities. Reason why I hopped up really quick is I think the mayor of Jackson, Haley Mortensen Levinson, is in the queue there, and she's
okay.
got her hand up, and so I think it'd probably be pertinent to hear from her first.
Okay, we'll do it that way. Carla, can you bring her in for us, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, here she comes.
My apologies, because I'm used to doing it.
I totally get it. Managing in person and online is difficult. Good morning, honorable representatives. Thank you for your service to our great state and for the opportunity to speak this morning. My name is Haley Morton Levinson, and I am mayor of Jackson and former town council member for 8 years. I also serve on the board of the Wyoming Association of Municipalities. As a fellow elected, I know the hard work and dedication you give to your positions, and I appreciate your time and commitment to the many issues you face and this early morning meeting. I would like to first recognize and thank the applicant and so many other ranching families in our state that are excellent stewards of their land, care about our communities, and care about the future of their lands and our communities. My family has been in the hospitality industry in Wyoming all my life, and I recognize the hard work and sacrifices our small business families make to survive. Senate File 157 is a bill addressing a problem that does not exist and is based on fear, not fact. No restrictions have been put on this application. The bill's advocates are afraid that the Jackson Town Council might deny their application for a water and sewer hookup. In our town's history, we have never denied a water or sewer hookup request. Similar to other Wyoming municipalities, we do have an application process that we ask all applicants to go through, and that's where we are with this request. In fact, Town of Jackson staff is meeting with the applicant staff today to continue that application process. This bill is based on speculation and worry from what might come to pass. As you know, what matters is not what staff or elected say, but what the body of elected officials vote on. The final vote is the answer. Our council has not voted on this proposal. As mentioned, the application process is in process, and as such, we have not had a review of the proposal in our public process. The application was submitted in late January. Staff is reviewing with the applicant's team, and it is scheduled to be formally heard by our town council on May 3rd. Please give our community and local government system a chance before passing a bill to address a fear rather than a problem, and before passing a bill that might have all sorts of unintended consequences for all of Wyoming's 99 municipalities. Please allow our public process to play out and let the government closest to the issues address the issue in a way that follows current Wyoming law. Thank you for your time this morning, and I welcome any questions you may have.
Committee questions? Representative Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mayor Morton Levinson, has the municipality received any kind of federal funds specifically dedicated for these types of infrastructure projects and for development?
I would have to refer to some of my staff members and our town manager, who is also the former public works manager, is online as well. So he would have those answers.
Okay, we'll have a few more questions for you, and then we'll bring him in. I think that would be
Thank you.
appropriate. Committee. Representative Heiner, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mayor, for being here. Although remotely, we're grateful to have this technology to be able to link you in like this. In your experience or knowledge, has there ever been any applications that required deed restrictions to be able to hook up to the sewer or water system in the past?
No.
Thank you.
Why were those restrictions put on in this particular case?
This case, so we're reviewing the applicant has submitted water and sewer hookup for their 24 acres, which I believe is about 84 units of market homes, and there have been no restrictions put in place. There has been a community discussion about the other acres that this applicant has. And that came about when the applicant asked for an upzone and rezone of that property. And that is separate from what we're discussing in this water and sewer application. If that makes sense.
Okay, it's hard for us to separate those two things out. And I'm not sure why they are in this case, but I think we'll have your city manager answer some of those questions too. Committee, Representative Ward.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure that this is a fair question to ask the mayor, because this is off a letter that was in our packet that came from Wyoming Planning Association, Wild Pass. But in that letter, they talked about communities should not be obligated to subsidize new extraterritorial developments which are not sustainable and do not protect current tax-paying customers. Is it your view, Madam Mayor, that it is your duty to protect the current tax-paying customers by how properties are developed and sold in your community?
It's my view that we, as the town who represents those that pay into the town water and sewer system, that we need to protect their rights and the longstanding agreements that they have in paying into the water and sewer system. And I have not reviewed that letter, so.
Okay, but you do feel that's your role to try to keep to protect the current tax-paying customers? You do feel that's your role?
Yes.
Thank you.
So we'll try to keep it going through the chairman. Sometimes it gets out of hand otherwise. And it's a
My
real formal-
apologies, Mr. Chair.
That's fine. It's a formal process that I got reprimanded by the speaker the other day for not doing it, and I've been here for 10 years. So it's something that we need to incorporate with what we're doing. I guess a question. Oh, go ahead, Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you for being here, Mayor. Does the town of Jackson have a planning committee that would go through these issues prior to going to the council?
Typically, water and sewer hookups go through staff and then come through council.
Okay.
We do have a planning committee or planning group, but these usually just go through staff and then council.
Representative West. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I guess another question I have is, does the county and city get together quite often on issues like this and kind of discuss how the plan to go forward in the future?
We do. We're the only county that has one municipality, and as such, we have monthly meetings with our county commissioners. And this has been an item that's been discussed, although the sketch plan was submitted through the county, not the town. And so we allowed that county process to play out and then waited to see what would come from that to receive the application in late January, and then are in process with this application now.
Pretty good. Representative Larson.
Yeah, I guess you hit on a point there that part of this delay is maybe because of the county.
I mean, perhaps they did submit, the applicant submitted the application before the county had approved the sketch plan. And so that was in late January, and I believe the county approved the sketch plan maybe mid-February, but I can't remember the exact date.
Okay, Representative Cyrus, do you still have a question or did they get answered?
Mr. Chairman, Mayor Morton Levinson, does the town council intend to approve this application?
I can't speak for the town council since we have not reviewed it as a body together. As I said, that we will be reviewing it on May 3rd if everything goes through the process, and we will have the discussion then in public. You know, as I also mentioned, we've never denied an application for water and sewer hookup. In my 8 years on the council, we have reviewed and approved water and sewer hookup outside of the town's jurisdiction, including one of our new schools, the airport, and a private school.
Okay, Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mayor. So my question, if we've never denied any permits and this isn't an issue for municipalities and they don't zone using the sewer pipe, do you see any problem bringing some certainty to our investors and developers in Wyoming by passing this bill, just making sure so everybody's certain that that's the way it's going to go forward and that their investment is safe, because there's massive investment when we start talking 60, 80 home developments.
For sure. Thank you for that question. You know, I would say that we've never denied, and that's because we've have the capacity and know that hooking up to municipal water and sewer is the best environmental action. However, without having that full community discussion in the future, and this is just for one municipality, I know that, you know, Wyoming has 99 municipalities and they all act a little differently in their protection of their water and sewer. But it's just that opportunity in the future to be able to keep these close to home, be able to have the community conversation, be able to work it through with individual applicants, and to address it when they come from out of the service area and adding it into the town is just something that we feel very strongly about keeping within the town's jurisdiction.
Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mayor. With the information that you have in hand right now, Mayor, and with this application, and I realize that you're not going to meet with the town council in regard to this application until May, but with the information that you have today, could you go on record as saying that you're supportive of this application without any further any deed restrictions on this lot or the rest of the ranch?
Since I'm just reviewing this section, I can say yes, as one council member, as mayor, that this is a by right development in my opinion, and that it would not require deed restrictions in my mind.
Thank you.
Okay. So how long has this process gone on? I'm talking about the sketch plan and any of the planning that's gone on for the development previous to that.
Yeah, so there's, as I mentioned before, there's a few different moving pieces. Specifically for this item, the sketch plan, I'm not sure when it was submitted to the county, but the discussions with the county happened in January and February. And then their application to the town came in late January, I believe January 28th, for this specific section of the property.
Okay.
And I would welcome my staff to clarify anything if they do have clarifications.
Representative Clausen, first, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mayor. I know different municipalities do things different ways, but when a developer goes in and develops raw land like this, is the city in charge of paying for the sewer hookups and everything, or the sewer inside of there, or the developer in our county? It's the developer that's in it, that's charged with the cost of all of the sewer and everything but the plant capacity. Would that be similar, or do you guys have a different setup?
That would be similar for us as well.
Representative Wharf?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I was just wondering what the average time period is for an application to be started and to get to completion. If we could get that answer, please.
I would have to refer to staff on the average time, but I believe it's about 2 months.
So that would be 2 months from the time you received the application in late January, is what you're indicating?
Maybe I would have to refer to staff. I think that there's a number of things that we work through with each application to make sure that they have, different items in place.
Okay, Representative Winter.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mayor, my question is, and I get a little confused here, but we've had testimony today that the application was made in October. And now you're saying that it wasn't until January, and you won't be able to get any decisions until in May. Does that seem a little bit skewampus here?
I don't think so. And I don't know of the application in October. And again, I would refer to staff. As far as I know, the application that we're reviewing with staff right now and the applicant's staff was submitted in late January.
Okay. I'd like to bring on your city planner now, if I may.
Yes, Larry Pardee is our city manager and the former public works director as well. And I believe that has his hand raised via Zoom. And thank you for the opportunity and to be able to speak to you remotely. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for being in our meeting, being available. So Carla, let me know when we have Mr. Pardee on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. He's coming over right now. He's there. He just needs to turn his camera on and his microphone on.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Carla. Mr. Chairman and committee members, good morning. Hi, my name is Larry Pardee, and I serve as the Town of Jackson's Town Administrator on behalf of the Town of Jackson. Thank you for this opportunity this morning. You've been hearing quite a bit about Senate File 157 by this time. The bill is dealing with a specific issue in a specific place, Jackson, Wyoming. The issue is seeking to address whether or not the Town of Jackson's wastewater treatment plant has capacity to handle 84 homes. The short and quick answer is absolutely. The plant has capacity currently, will have capacity for some time into the future. The Town of Jackson has never publicly said we don't have capacity for this development. Please note that. That's very important. The town's wastewater treatment plant system is part of a greater, larger system. And we're working at this time to understand water and sewer systems and the capacity to handle those systems based on current and future growth. We're currently in the process of performing a capacity study that started almost 24 months ago because it was tied to a rate study and a capacity study. We finished the rate first. Now we're trying to follow up and finish our capacity component of the study, which will be completed here in May and June. And the 84 homes happened to pop up. This development popped up during that time. Our preference would be to wait until the capacity study is completed before evaluating any new hookups outside of town limits. Because this issue is so important to the local landowners, we are considering this application right now. Before the study is fully completed, evaluated, and presented to the Jackson Town Council for acceptance and approval. The Town of Jackson's sewer treatment plan is one piece of a bigger, complicated, very expensive public infrastructure and asset. It's worth $125 million. Currently, the town is trying to figure out how the community is going to grow and whether the pipes, the pieces of systems, water, sewer, pipes, wells, pumps, lift stations, you understand, the wastewater treatment plant and everything it takes to operate those systems can handle the current and future growth. Why are we concerned? Because the Jackson Hole area has been growing rapidly over the last few years. Actually, during the COVID pandemic, we have gone from growing rapidly to developing almost at a ridiculous pace. Do you know, in 2020, in Teton County, Wyoming, there was $1.8 billion, $1.8 billion in real estate sales were sold in Teton County. Construction is booming. We want to make sure our water and sewer systems will meet all Wyoming laws, regulations, our fire, our safety, environmental. Do so in a way that is fair to our residents, to our businesses, for future development, and protect the health, safety, and welfare of our greater community. Why are we engaged in a major planning process in this northern South Park area is exactly where this applicant is. We want to make sure we understand all of the needs of this landowner, the other landowners that have development opportunities, and our local constituents. Please note, in conclusion, this isn't whether our wastewater treatment plant has capacity. It absolutely has capacity. We have never stated that. These 84 homes are well within the capacity right now of the plant. It is our local systems around this area of development that are lacking. Our water lines, sewer lines, should this development happen and connect, we will have to look at upgrading and what those costs will be and the impacts those generate so that it's not borne by the public, but by the application. This isn't about the capacity of the plant. This is about whether Jackson's water and sewer systems have capacity for the next 50 years of growth. The town of Jackson has never, ever denied a water or sewer hookup request in our history, ever. We hear and understand the request from this applicant on their 84 units. We respect it. We heard it. They just got their approval in February. We are processing the request in a timely, respectful, and professional manner. Matter of fact, today at 1 o'clock, their engineers and my engineers and I are going to sit down for hours and begin to do the first base level calculations of flows, rates, volumes, and what it's going to take for this development to connect to the town's water and sewer systems. We believe this bill is premature at this time. We respectfully request that you allow our local process to play out. Thank you, Chairman Eklund, all of the committee members. I want to thank you for your dedication, your service to this great state of Wyoming. Thank you again. We stand ready for questions.
Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Pardee. So I'm assuming you have an enterprise fund to run your water and sewer in the town of Jackson, and I'm assuming you keep your statutory reserves up there, or you have some sort of reserves to take care when these problems arise, or a plan going forward with your enterprise fund for billing. Is that something that's fairly accurate? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, thank you for the question. Absolutely. Our water and sewer systems are enterprise funds and they're self-sustaining by state statute. We follow the laws. Yes, we have relatively healthy fund balances. And that was part of our rate and capacity study because we're looking at the future and we had to make sure our current rates or future rates would meet the new demands and growth being placed on us. Yes, we do have a sewer plan, or excuse me, water and sewer fund balances.
Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Pardee, for being here with us today. As you mentioned, that you believe the wastewater treatment plant has adequate capacity, and it may just be some of these outlying areas that need to be looked at a little bit. But as you have looked at this application, I'll ask you the same question I asked of the mayor. Based on what you've seen thus far, do you see any reason to deny this application? And do you see any reason to impose any deed restrictions upon this land or any other land of the ranch for approval?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Heiner, thank you for your question. I can't speak to the elected officials and policy decision-making. I can talk as a former director of public works that spent close to 40 years of his life in working in public works, and I've served the last 2 years as the town administrator. I can talk from my perspective in my position, but I have no authority to make policy decisions on deed restrictions and others. Yes, if it's purely an engineering calculation, we have plenty of capacity at the wastewater treatment plant. We have plenty of capacity in our well systems to feed this development. Where we're going to get, we need to spend a little time and look closer, put the microscope on, and we'll start that this afternoon with their engineers, is the supporting systems in the area. It's the water lines, sewer lines, lift stations, and so on. Those are the areas we need to make sure we don't have any deficiencies and that we account for whatever the costs are. As for the deed restrictions, I will leave those decisions to the policymakers, but I feel comfortable based on what I've seen. Again, I've not received any information than a written letter, and I've spoken to their attorney, their planning staff, and their engineer a couple of weeks ago for a few hours. Again, I think Haley Martin Levinson, our mayor, articulated it perfectly. They submitted an application in January. They got their zoning approval in February. For us, I say the clock has started. We're working hard to meet with them and their team to work through this and get to May 3rd for a review and discussion before the Jackson Town Council.
Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks for being here with us this morning, Larry Perdue. What my question is, and I think I've heard it, I'm a little bit hard hearing, but I think I heard it already once or twice this morning. People that live in the county but buy a city, it'll make no difference if it's Jackson or Gillette, are at a huge disadvantage by living by the city, but even though they're in the same county. Would that be called discrimination? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Representative Fontier. I apologize. I don't quite understand the question. If you could please restate it.
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman. What I'm getting at is as we get, and I live just not too far up in the county line. When they place covenants and restrictions on or limitations on your guys' standards or on city standards and county standards, that's supposed to be for safety and protection of the groundwaters and things like that. I realize that. But it seems to me like when you live close to a city, you've got a different set of standards than you do when you live 50 miles out in the county. Why is that? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Fontier, thank you for the question. I apologize. I cannot speak knowledgeably to that. Any particular issues around that question, I would have to defer to others, maybe our planning staff or the county planning staff, to better answer your questions. So my apologies.
Are they available? The planning staff for this meeting?
Thank you, Chairman. Not today. It's our mayor, Haley Martin Levinson, and myself will represent the town of Jackson.
The mayor probably wouldn't be able to answer it either then, is what your guess is.
I think it would, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the question is well suited for Teton County or county planning departments.
Okay.
Not for the local municipalities. We can talk about, there is some differences, and I understand the general question, but would have to rely more on Teton County to provide a more accurate and updated answer to that question.
Representative Clausen.
Not a question, but I'll just take a stab at that. So there's unique equations with Teton County that are probably different than your county. Less than 3% of, or less than 3 or 5% of the land is deeded in Teton County and it's more dense. You'd have different issues in Campbell County, but that's a long subject and probably not the venue to go down that road.
Mr. Chairman, I can help address Representative Clausen's question. If the 97% of Teton County is federally and state protected lands, obviously made up of the national parks, forest services, and so on, the remaining 3% potentially has development. That's what we're focused today. This is just at the southern boundary of the town of Jackson. It's outside our corporate limits, but it's right at our doorstep. The parcel that's before you for discussion.
Okay, any further questions, committee? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Pardee. I'd like to have people raise, do we have other people on
Mr. Chairman,
line as well? Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Blackburn.
Mayor
go ahead.
Cheyenne's here. We might want to hear from him.
Okay, and I'm gonna get some mayors and former mayors involved in this. They might be next. I'm not sure. Do we have other people online right now? Nobody. Okay. I don't see any hands up there. So I guess the next place I'd like to start is with representatives for mayors and those local governments, as well as mayors and former mayors. We'll go with that group of people first. Come on up, sir. It's your turn now.
Just checking. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, Matt Hall, the mayor of the city of Cody, and also president of Wyoming Association of Municipalities. I am joined to my right by our legislative representative for Wyoming, Bob McLaren, as well as identified in the audience, mayor of our fine capital city of Cheyenne, Patrick Collins, who coming up here.
Welcome, all three of you.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I just want to say first that we certainly, or I personally, can sympathize with Ms. Gills and her family's plight. I also do want to say that local governments aren't against freedom. I think we're very much in favor of it. And I think that's a lot of what the reasons for us testifying today here is that, you know, when you make some of these legislative calls for these specific kind of issues within the state, they have the repercussions of affecting all of the municipalities within our state. This bill being proposed is a single development in Jackson. It certainly isn't uniformly applicable. It's not a uniformly applicable problem to the other 98 municipalities. And I think that trying to take a swipe that way with it is really just makes it hard for mayors and councils that are duly elected like yourselves to represent their citizens to the best of their ability. I feel for the situation for sure. And I just think that based on what I've been hearing for testimony this morning, that this problem even seems to be being worked on by the local governing body with the applicant as we speak today. So I would urge you to consider all of the other municipalities and even counties that you represent and vote no and not move this bill forward at this time. And with that, I would take questions and certainly cede time to the other representatives here on the panel. Thank you.
Representative Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sir, you testified that this is not applicable to other municipalities. That may be so, but could it be?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Blackburn. Could it be? I'm As far as
In 10 years, could it be applicable to another municipality like Cheyenne or Gillette?
I'd have to ask those mayors to probably answer those specific questions as it pertains to the city of Cody. It wouldn't really be applicable, as I mentioned. And I guess that's probably where I was drawing from when I said that. Representative Blackburn. Thank you.
Representative Wharf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering, are you aware of deed restrictions being used or if they've occurred in other municipalities throughout the state? Thank you.
Sorry, I keep working the button. Mr. Chairman, Representative Wharf, overall, I don't know too many. My title as president of WAM is certainly a title. It doesn't embody me with all the information on what's going with all of our municipalities as far as those deed restrictions work. Again, for the city of Cody, we don't use this tool quite yet. We're certainly not. And getting back to the point, we're not really faced with the same problems that Teton County and Jackson are. I think most of the counties and municipalities have a pretty good working relationship, and ours is pretty good up in Park. So as it stands right now, we don't have any of those kind of restrictions.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to pull it back to what I think the discussion should be. This bill is dealing with private property rights. And I guess the concern that I share is, I mean, we've kind of gotten off to where we're just talking about one specific issue. And I think this bill addresses the infringement on private property rights. And if in fact we are giving the municipalities the ability to put deed restrictions on the development of your private property to protect the local tax-paying consumers, that's a little, that does seem a little concerning to me. I don't own a lot of property, but I guarantee if I did, I would want to have the ability to develop those properties to the best ability to benefit my family. And that's the purpose that I understand this bill that's before us is dealing with the impacts on private property rights. So I just want to mention that to the committee. I think it's important if that's in fact the case, and I throw that out to anybody. You got two other people up there helping you. I don't want to put you on the spot, sir, but I guess that's one thing I want to know is if that's something that municipalities feel that is their authority, that they can put deed restrictions on private property as it's developed.
And the questions that we're asking, we're trying to get to the bottom of that as to how much private property interference there has been in this. And I
Correct,
think that
Mr.
there's been
Chairman.
a lot of testimony that will help us in determining that. Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're in a huge economic downturn right now, and most of Wyoming revolves around fossil fuels. I know over Teton County, a few other ones, that's not part of the equation, but as things go backwards, and I've worked in ghost towns all over this state in Colorado and Montana. As the population goes backwards, are these restrictions are going to come off, or are they just going to be hard and fast from here on out? Because if they're not flexible one way or the other, that's not going to be good for the guy later on coming in wanting to buy a ranch, and he's got 10 times more restrictions on him than the neighbor down the road. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Fortner and Representative Wharf, I really do appreciate your comments, and they certainly, I think, encapsulate what we all as elected officials deal with on a daily basis when we come to making decisions. As my council, whenever we entertain an ordinance and passing an ordinance, we have to look at all sides of it and how this is going to affect people and carry it in our hearts up front that, we are for property rights. We're for individual property rights in this state. Most of my council is very conservative, and we have a really hard time. In fact, that's part of the reason we probably don't have some of the deed restrictions that exist in some of the other towns and counties. But I feel that as the state evolves and as the economy hopefully turns around, then, you know, we leave it up to our local representatives too to do the best they can to help represent their citizens and represent the needs of their towns and counties. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I guess my question is, has it happened? Has in these downturns where these ghost towns have they rescinded all the restrictions of the towns and turned them back to the local owner? Or are them restrictions still in place? I guess that's a question I'm asking. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I am gonna actually, I think, turn that over to Mr. McLaren, I think, who can answer that quite well, if that's okay.
We're expanding the problem a bit because we're the communities that are impacted by the downturn are kind of separate from this issue, which is communities that are booming and trying to figure out how to cope with that. But go ahead and take a stab at it.
Mr. Chairman,
do it shortly,
Representative,
please.
there's a number of types of deed restrictions, and I don't want to get into the weeds on this, but typically there's permanent deed restrictions, and then the town or the county in the past has had deed restrictions that expire after a fixed period of time. But right now, the permanent deed restrictions are in place in perpetuity, but I will tell you that the state tax structure incents second home development in Jackson Hole. When you talk about these deed restricted units, you know, the price of a deed restricted unit is somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000. And that's for a unit with a price appreciation cap and restrictions on who can live there. These units are put in place to ensure that the workforce can live in Jackson Hole. Right now, probably 50 to 60% of the workforce commutes from either over Teton Pass or up the Snake River Canyon. So affordable housing in Jackson Hole is a way to provide for our local economy. That's where the police officers live. If you look at the number of units that are in deed restricted affordable housing in Teton County, the sheriff lives in a deed restricted affordable house. Otherwise, he couldn't afford to live in Teton County. The county clerk, a number of our law enforcement officers, many of our firefighters, and many of our service workers who, but for a deed restricted affordable housing, would be forced to commute down Valley and over Teton Pass. But to answer your question, Representative, some have come off, most have not.
Okay. So when these deed restricted parcels, they were done by agreement of the property owner and the developer.
Mr. Chairman, most of these because both Teton County and the town of Jackson have affordable housing regulations, so that when you build a business that generates the need for workforce housing, you have to provide, if your business generates 100 new employees, you would have to provide housing for approximately 15 of those 100 new employees. I'm sorry, I forgot the question.
Well, it's the deed restriction, the deed restricted properties that are now in Jackson were.
Yeah, excuse me. So they're typically done as part of the development review process. This case is a little bit different because the development is not going through the town development review process. It's going through the county development review process. But either in a county review process or a town review process, a development would be subject to a number of restrictions, and affordable housing is one of them. And the level of affordable housing that is required is a function of the job generation and a couple of other factors. So this is a little unusual because it's not going through the town process, but generally it's part of the development review process when a development comes in to either the town or the county.
Thank you. Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McLaren, I recognize the difficulty it is in this area that we're discussing for affordable housing and the determination or the desire for the town to create more affordable housing. So in a typical development, is it common to ask a developer to provide some deed restrictions on part of the property such that you could not only develop but hook into the utility systems like this? Is this pretty typical to ask them for deed restrictions as part of the application?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that's typically part of the process. There will be a calculation for an affordable housing requirement, and you can either provide it or you can pay into a housing fund. And then those are the county housing department will facilitate the development of some of these housing units. There are about 1,500 deed restricted units in our community right now. But for those units, probably 85%, 90% of the local workers would be commuting in over Teton Pass and up the canyon to make the economy work. Deed restricted affordable housing in Jackson, Wyoming is economic development. I know it's different than any other place in Wyoming. But without that, we do not have a workforce. And that includes public safety, that includes restaurant workers, that includes sewer plant operators. So it's been in Wyoming for 40 years and I lived all over the state. And I know Jackson's in many respects is not part of Wyoming, but we're within the geographic boundaries. So it's a very important issue to our community for the economic viability of our community. Because as I said previously, the state tax structure incents second home development. I worked in Vail, Colorado as a town manager before I came here. I was told by a guy that was moving from Vail to Jackson that he paid for his house in Teton Village with the savings on his income tax. So by virtue of our tax structure, we're driving up the price of land. And this is a hard issue for me personally because this family is a long-standing family in Jackson. They've been great stewards. I knew Mrs. Gill's father. I consider him a friend, maybe not anymore, but I've known him for a long time. And her grandfather was the mayor for 2 terms, sat on the county commission, was a highway commissioner, and her great-grandfather was a member of this body, Robert Bruce Porter. So, but this issue, I don't want to, the deed restricted affordable housing issue is a much broader issue than what's going on with this development, because I would submit to you, as you've heard from the town of Jackson, they've never turned anybody down. And on the outside chance this bill doesn't go anywhere, I would bet you dollars to donuts, they're going to be hooked up to the town of Jackson sewer system. But I digress on affordable housing. I apologize, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, okay, I need to respond to a few things. If the committee will indulge me, Jackson is a part of Wyoming, not just geographically. It's unique because you got 97% of it is owned by the federal government and you're operating on 3%. Part of that 3% we're discussing today, I believe. And it would be my hope that there are no ill feelings between families over this. And that's part of why we'd like to get this bill. If we pass it or we amend it or fix it in some way, it works for both sides. And that's the reason for all the questions. And it may take up our whole time doing this, but it's worth the time. I just hate to see communities and families torn apart over issues that can be resolved. Representative Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Mayor Collins, it has been testified that this doesn't affect any other municipalities, but here I see you sit, so I'm assuming that it does have some, the Cheyenne municipality does have some problems with it. Could you maybe fill us in with your concerns?
Mr. Chairman, I'm Patrick Collins. I'm the new mayor of Cheyenne. I'm in my first 100 days, and so I'm still trying to get my feet wet on all of the issues that are coming forward. I did spend 3-year terms on the city council, and most of those I spent on our public services committee. So I've been through a lot of development that's come through our process. And I guess the concern that I came to see Representative Blackburn yesterday when I was reading this bill is I didn't understand it. I'm still not quite sure I understand exactly what's going on. But my concern was that it seems like there was a dispute going on between a developer and a town, and a law was being written to correct that the perceived problem between those two entities. And I didn't understand, I'm trying to understand what the second and third order effects would be. How would this affect the other 98 municipalities in the city or in the state, excuse me. You know, we sit down a lot with developers. The Loomis family just brought 2,500 acres of property into the city that they plan to build homes on. And we have to sit down and talk about, you know, where do you put a fire station? Where do you put a high school? Where do you put the junior high school, the 3 grade schools? You know, all those things we have to sit down and talk about if you're going to bring a large piece of property in. And what I wanted to make sure was that this bill wouldn't affect our ability to sit down with property owners and do those annexation agreements and those zoning agreements that we need to do to make sure that we can properly plan how our city grows. We're going to have a new piece of property start to come in. We're building a new sewer line that should sewer about 35,000 homes. You know, the school district's telling me we're gonna need 2 high schools, 2 junior high schools, a whole bunch of grade schools, a couple fire stations in this area over the next 30, 40 years. And so it seems to me that we have to be able to sit down with those landowners and talk about how are we going to do that to make sure that we grow properly so that we can provide all of the services that a city should provide. And what I'm trying to understand is, does this bill affect our ability to do that? And as I've sat here through this last hour hearing that, I'm still not sure I understand if it stops us or challenges us. It just basically says that we can't restrict the uses that are allowed under the section. And I tried to read it last night and I'm still not sure. So I guess my concern is I just want to make sure that while we're trying to help a developer in a town, that we're not hurting all the other cities and towns' ability to effectively grow and do the things that they need to do.
Okay, one of the helps I can offer you is that most of the developments that I know of outside, and some are a ways outside of the city of Cheyenne and otherwise have their own sewer, and they're not really hooked into the city. It looks to me like you've got at least one of them here that you're developing sewer infrastructure for that development. Is it? I'm not close enough to it. I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman.
Did you hear that? Okay.
I believe so. All of the developments I spoke about will all be in the city limits of Cheyenne. So they're areas of land that the landowners have come to us and said they want to become part of the city of Cheyenne and are looking to provide or have us provide water, sewer, all of the services that you would have inside of city limits. You can't grow at that density without having city water and sewer.
Okay, so that's a difference between what we're dealing with here and what you're talking about. We also have developments outside of the city limits. That's kind of what I was referring to.
Absolutely, sir. And if I may, we have, I think, probably 17,000 people in city water and sewer in the Cheyenne area that are outside of our city limits. So you're correct. We do a lot of that.
Okay, Representative Heiner, I'm going to get back to you first because I kind of cut you off with some of my.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Need to be said.
And this goes back to Mr. McLaren. We talked a lot about affordable housing and the needs in your community for more affordable housing. With this application for 84 market-based units, which would have prices much higher than affordable housing, it seems plausible and almost required that you approach the landowner for some more affordable housing to be included in this proposal so you can meet your requirements. Do you see that as something that most probably will be asked, is for some deed restrictions on other properties so such that you can have affordable housing?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I am not intimately familiar with the Teton County land development regulations, but my understanding is that as they come through, as you heard previously, they've approved sketch plan approval. As they go through the process, the development would be subject to the applicable Teton County affordable housing regulations, whatever they may be. I will tell you, my understanding is that the rate of the requirements for deed restricted affordable housing on residential units is a pretty low number because it's based on the nexus of generation of jobs. So for a commercial development, it would be much higher number, but the answer to your question is whatever the applicable affordable housing regulations are in Teton County would be applied to this development. And I don't know what those are, what those numbers would be.
Okay. Representative Clausen.
This is a question for Wham, and it's putting a point, I guess, on this conversation because I guess I've had the fortune or misfortune of being in this and Representative Blackburn for a long time on the corporations committee, and the redactions and the uniqueness of this particular part of the world. But sometimes at the end of the day, we outsmart ourselves with good deeds, and I think we might be right there. So in this particular, I mean, I understand the need for redactions, the need for affordable housing, although I don't always agree with it. But at the end of the day, when we push on private property rights, we end up at a spot where in almost any landowner or rancher does not want to develop their land or sell it, period. I don't care where you are. I've been in these conversations a long time. Sometimes you're forced into the position for economic reasons. Like you said, our tax structure in Wyoming goes to or pushes more second homes. The federal tax structure with the state taxes, it pushes ranches out. And in this particular point of this conversation, I think that's exactly where we are. So to put a point on this conversation, if this bill or this sewer restriction restricts private property rights to the point where these landowners have to, they're in a position, if they're in a position sometime down the road where they have to sell the whole thing versus a chunk. I think that gets rid of the goal of what the end goal of what the locals in this particular county are searching for with their very restrictive redactions and deed restrictions. And I think we're at an impasse here where we have to say, okay, we've run up against this wall and we have to make a choice going forward. And I guess that's not a question, but wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, the thing I would add is that we just meet during this time of year. We'll have a special session. We won't be dealing with this during this special session. We won't have time. So we're wanting to get this dealt with now if we can. I think there may be some possibilities for compromise that will suit both parties. So that I'm thinking about, and I'll bring those up later, but we need more testimony before we can get there. And if the committee's okay, I would like to bring Mrs. Gill back up, and I just got a few more questions for her. And we will, yes, sir. Yeah, her legal counsel may come as well, because you might help us, and you may help us at any point in time, and any representative that you might have. So the first question I would have for you is you're wanting an expedited process. And this is expediting things when you ask the Wyoming legislature to butt into what we normally don't have to interfere with. So can you explain to us why your concerns and why you need this done quickly and expedited well?
Thank you, Chairman, representatives. Respectfully, the timeline that has been spoken of by the mayor and the town manager is actually incorrect. We submitted our sewer connection request in October, and it took their staff nearly 2 months to respond, to merely let us know that we submitted incorrectly because they'd changed the policy, even though the policy was nowhere to be found on their website. So we submitted a letter to the town of Jackson, which is the standard practice, has been for years. And then we were told around 6 weeks later that we actually needed to submit a miscellaneous request, which we then did. So we actually submitted our request in October. So it has not been a 2-month timeline. We have been waiting since October for any of the town council and their staff to meet with us. And the only time that they actually decided to reach out to us and meet with us was when this bill was brought to the legislature. That was the first time the communication really started.
Yes. Okay. Committee, any questions? May I bring in the legal counsel and you might be able to add some of this to this. So what I don't understand and I need clarity on is you began your process in October. And then I'm hearing, and was that process with the city or was that with the county? Help me out with what all has happened, because the city indicated that it had started with the county, and the really your beef and this bill has to do with the city.
Chairman, representatives, I would like to bring in Liz Brimmer to kind of go over the timeline to help clarify that for you.
Mrs. Brimmer, go ahead.
Chairman Eklund, members of the committee, my name is Liz Brimmer for the Hereford Ranch. And let me just point out, we met with staff, the public works staff, July 2020. We then prepared, and the reason to meet with that staff was exactly to get the right pipe sides, the key standards. What would they like? What would they need? How could we incorporate that request so that we are responsible developers for this land that has property rights of 100% single family homes, free market homes? That is the zoning that exists today.
Go ahead, Representative Larson.
Mr. Chairman, you say staff, is that county or city?
Chairman Eklund, Representative Larson, that was the city public works staff, because there is a monopoly in this community, you could say, and it's an understandable monopoly. The town owns and operates the only option for sewer facility. And to answer a previous question that was asked, there was $9 million, in fact, invested in federal funds, state revolving funds, for the expanded capacity of this particular sewer facility. That $9 million was predicated on the unit count on Ms. Gill's property. So it was the $9 million was received already counting these units for anticipated connection within the service area. So I just wanted to go back and remember that key question.
And how long ago was that?
That was in the 1990s.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
So it's long, Chairman, Mr. Chairman, it's
Long
been
planning process.
long and been anticipated, which is what our surprise is by the questions of whether or not there would be capacity. In fact, I can tell you, and it's enlightening to hear it today. This was the first time today that we have in fact heard that there is capacity. We've tried several times to communicate, and it's been very hard. And I want to bring it back to the bill, if I may, Mr. Chairman, just to be able to hone it back in to the purpose of this bill. It is private property rights. It is landowner rights. The bill simply says, and it's not confusing, if I could respectfully disagree with my friend, Mr. Mayor Collins. It simply says you can't pick uses by conditioning a sewer connection. That's all the bill says. To get a sewer connection, you cannot condition that sewer connection by picking uses that you wish you had. You can't say, I wish this wasn't free market homes. I wish this was a different kind of home. That is in fact discrimination via a sewer line. Municipalities have broad discretion to zone. They have broad discretion to have a public, transparent process to be able to show what land uses are. Counties have that same ability. All we're asking in this bill, and it is very important because after you leave this fine hall in Cheyenne, we will be alone without any ability to bring it back to the fact that what a municipality cannot do today is zone via a sewer connection. They have no ability to do that today. So it's a little confusing why they would be fighting this bill so hard because they don't have that ability to do it today. The legislation before you is just a clarifying bill. It just clarifies state statutes that in fact, you cannot zone by a sewer connection. You cannot pick those uses or discriminate against the free market via a sewer connection. You can't do that today. If you would be inclined to vote in favor of this bill, they won't be able to do it after you leave Cheyenne. This has no net effect of taking anything away from a municipality. They don't have that power today. And I believe you'll be hearing from Harriet Hageman in just a minute to be able to speak more clearly. I am not a lawyer, but she's a fine attorney. We need this clarification. It is vital. You've spent so much of your good time this morning hearing all of these arguments that may appear circular. They feel to us as a little circular when we get into the discussions with the town. And I can tell you, we were only enabled a meeting after this bill was introduced. So please, I want to be brief in closing. We need this bill very much. Please be so kind as to pass it today.
Okay. Committee, I need to take a break and I don't want to miss any of the testimony and we're probably not going to get to the next bill as I'm looking at the time and that's why we started at 7. We may, but there are other people that need to testify. We'll take a 5-minute break and I want you to come back and I want Mrs. Hageman to come up and offer her thoughts on the property rights and what the bill does. And any unintended consequences, I want people to be thinking about that. 5 minutes. committee, let's come back to order. And we have an attorney here who knows quite a little bit about private property rights, and I would like for her to come up and testify next.
Good morning.
We're here. So go ahead when you're ready.
All
We'll-
right. Good
we'll
morning,
gather
everyone.
everybody.
I don't want to take a lot of time. There are quite a few other people who may want to be testifying today. There are a couple of points that I would like to make, and I very much appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Obviously, I am known as being a strong private property rights advocate. I spent a lot of my time over the last 30 years fighting for private property rights, and I think that this is an important bill to ensure that we are protecting private property rights in Wyoming. One of the things that I think is important is that we need to look at this as being much more broadly applicable than just Teton County and the city of Jackson. When I read this, I do not see this as being only a town of Jackson or a Teton County issue. I look at it as being, in reality, all of our cities and towns are required to comply with zoning regulations. So there's a couple of things that I want to address. And one of the first ones was, I know that there were some questions about whether litigation is the solution here. Why does the legislature want to get involved in this issue? If there's an issue between 2 or 3 parties, perhaps they need to go into court and have the court resolve the matter. The fact is that the court's role is only to interpret the law. The courts do not make the law. You guys make the law, and then the courts interpret that and apply it. So I don't see this as being an issue that is ripe for litigation, or that the folks should have to go into litigation in order to protect their private property rights under this circumstance. Again, this is a law of general applicability. It doesn't just apply to one community, and for that reason, it's appropriate for legislation. I actually believe that this is a fairly elegant clarification to existing law. It is uniformly applicable to the state as a whole. Zoning is the only mechanism by which government has the authority to control land use in the state of Wyoming. And that is not only set out by state statute, but it was confirmed by the Wyoming Supreme Court just recently in the case of ASCI versus Laramie County that was issued just a month or so ago. Once a zoning ordinance is adopted, those are the rules by which the landowners must comply. And those are the rules by which the county and the cities also must comply. The zoning ordinances dictate land use within particular areas. And what is important is that once everybody needs to know what the rules are, and that's the point of this. This is about due process. This is about notice. This is about, I think a couple of you have commented about owning private property or owning property and developing property, and being able to know what the rules are when you go into the process for development, whether it's a housing development or it's going to be oil and gas development or whatever it may be. We're all entitled to know what the rules are ahead of time. And that's what zoning does. That's the purpose of zoning. I think that it's very important, and I was looking up some cases as I was sitting in the room here, because I think that what has concerned me about some of the discussion associated with the town of Jackson and Teton County is the idea of imposing conditions on the ability to get a sewer hookup or to be able to obtain a building permit or something along those lines. And there are a couple of United States Supreme Court cases that have been issued, and what they refer to in that particular circumstance is they describe those kinds of things if they are outside of the authority of the particular governing body, the municipality or the county. They refer to them as unconstitutional conditions. And I'm going to read you a few things from a case. There's actually 3 cases that have been issued on this by the United States Supreme Court. One of them is Kuntz, K-O-O-N-T-Z, and the other 2 are called Nolan, N-O-L-L-A-N, and Dolan, D-O-L-A-N. And what these cases do is they set limits on a government's ability to impair property interest using land use regulations. Under these decisions, there must be a nexus and rough proportionality between the government's demand and the effects of the proposed land use. This test was historically applied when the government requested that the owner relinquish some of his or her property, like an easement, as a condition on a land use permit. In the Kuntz case, the landowner sought to develop some property in Florida. The land was classified as wetlands, and the Florida law required the permit applicants wishing to build to offset the resulting environmental damage if they went forward with that project. This particular developer offered to mitigate by deeding to the defendant water management district a conservation easement on nearly 3/4 of the property at issue. The district, however, found that that mitigation was inadequate, and they suggested that they would grant the permit only if the developer reduced their project from 3.7 acres to 1 acre. Or they had to go and develop wetlands on property that was completely separate and distinct from where this development was going to be taking place. What the United States Supreme Court said was that is an unconstitutional condition. You cannot condition a property right on giving up other rights. And so I think that that's what's very, very important here, and why I really appreciated the way that this particular statute was written, because all it is saying is that we're going to make sure that both the applicant, the landowner, as well as the municipality or the county must comply with the zoning regulations. And if I come in and I want to develop my property, so long as I am complying with the zoning regulations, so long as I am complying with the rules as they exist, I should be able to get that sewer hookup, for example, or that water hookup, for example, or I ought to be able to develop my gravel pit, for example, which is what was at issue in the ASCI case. So I see this not as a dramatic change or alteration in the way that we do business in the state of Wyoming or the way that we look at developments, but simply as a mechanism to make sure that there's a balancing of the interest, that our private property landowners are able to develop their property, to get the sewer hookups, to be able to go forward with the projects that are important for their families and for the future of our communities, while at the same time protecting the resources of our municipalities. We've heard from going back to the town of Jackson that they absolutely have the capacity for this particular development. So the issue becomes, does this development meet the zoning regulations of that county, that community, and that municipality? And if it does, then I don't believe any particular municipality ought to be able to deny or condition or unconstitutionally condition a development based upon outside or extraneous interests. So that's really all I wanted to say. I'm only here on my own behalf. I'm not here on behalf of anybody else. I'm here because I believe very strongly in private property rights. I think it's absolutely critical to the health and future of the state of Wyoming that we'd be able to develop our property reasonably and pursuant and within the confines of our constitutional rights. And I do believe that this is nothing more than really kind of codifying those US Supreme Court decisions talking about unconstitutional conditions.
Committee.
Mr. Chairman, this is Carla.
Hi, Carla.
We have a fire alarm here in the Capitol building, so I've got to exit for a minute. I don't know if you have one there in the extension.
No, we haven't heard anything. We'll stay here until they kick
Okay.
us out.
Should I go ahead and let Mr. Party back in? He's got his hand raised since I'm going to
Okay.
be gone for a minute.
Yep, go ahead and let him in. Mr. Party, we may bring you in as needed. So wait until we call you in, if you would, please.
And I'll let you know, Mr. Chairman, as soon as I can return.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry.
Okay, questions for Ms. Hageman? Go ahead, Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Hageman, for being here with us. We've heard a lot about affordable housing this morning in testimony. And it's my understanding, and you can correct me because I'm often wrong, but it's my understanding that those that should be treated under zoning when a property is being zoned to allow for affordable housing. That's when that kind of issues are resolved and discussed. Is that correct, or am I incorrect again?
Yes, Mr. Chairman and Representative Heiner, those are the kinds of policy decisions that are made through a zoning process because then the community is involved. They shouldn't be done on a piecemeal basis, if you will. Again, conditioning the hookups for a sewer or water on a particular parcel of property and trying to dictate how that property is used. That's why zoning is important. That's why being able to identify how a particular county or community has identified what kinds of uses can be on that property. That's the notice and due process part of it. If you are going through a zoning process in a community, then everybody involved, including the landowners, have the ability to participate in that process. It shouldn't be done on a piecemeal basis. And that's why I have used the word elegant in describing this particular provision, is that it is that you cannot have restricted uses that are allowed under applicable zoning regulations. And again, I think that this was reinforced by the ASCI decision issued by the Wyoming Supreme Court just recently. And it's also the United States Supreme Court in the 3 cases that I referenced. That's exactly what they say. You cannot condition the use or the exercise of a constitutional right by having to give up a constitutional right.
Okay. This meeting will be hopefully temporarily adjourned, so. Yeah. Sir, where do we go? Okay.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Larry. Sorry. Yeah, put you on hold and out, Haley. Larry, are you getting that to mute yourself?
What's that?
Mute yourself. For some reason you're live on the video.
Oh, there it is.
Our committee will come back to order. We've got a few committee members. Yeah, I think your friend here would like his seat back. So do we have more questions for Ms. Hageman while she's here concerning private property rights? What you have given us is that there are cases that have been brought before the Wyoming Supreme Court as well as the US Supreme Court that have ruled that if we're within the zoning rights that are established in that property, it would be unconstitutional to put other restrictions on
Other
it.
conditions. They're called unconstitutional conditions. Now, what I don't want to leave the impression that there can't be any kind of requirements or associated with a development. And I don't want to be that broad. I'll use the language by the United States Supreme Court to make sure that I'm being very specific on that. What they refer to is that what the Supreme Court, the language that the majority believed that this was a clear application of the unconstitutional conditions doctrine. And that was where the water district was trying to require the developer to reduce the project from 3.7 acres to 1 acre, or to basically develop wetlands off-site. And the Supreme Court held that those were unconstitutional conditions, which prevents the government from denying a benefit to a person because he exercises a constitutional right. In other words, if you're exercising your constitutional property rights, they cannot force you to give up other constitutional rights. Here, according to the majority, Kuntz was exercising his constitutional right not to have his property taken without just compensation and should not have his permit denied because of that exercise. And what they refer to is that the conditions that are imposed have to have a nexus and a rough proportionality between the demand and the proposed land use. Now that's set case law. So there's really nothing that this committee needs to do with regard to that. What I'm saying is that I believe the way that this particular statute complies with that and is within the spirit and the concept of what the US Supreme Court held in that line of cases called Nolan and Dolan. So that's really what I'm talking about, is that a community, a city can put and place conditions upon property use. But what they're saying here is that there cannot be deed restrictions that are outside of what the zoning ordinances require. And I believe that that fully comports with the recent ASCI decision issued by the Wyoming Supreme Court.
Okay, committee, any questions? Yes, Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Chairman. If I'm out of bounds with this question, please stop me. On this case we're on today with this statute, where does this relate constitutionally with where we're at right now? Are we sidestepping the Constitution, or are we spot on with the Constitution?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Fortner, I believe that, as I indicated earlier, this is an elegant clarification of existing law.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, committee. And thank you, Ms.
Thank you.
Hageman.
Thank you.
So people that we haven't brought in are the private other people. We've now heard from city legal counsel and the property owner. I'd like to hear from some of the groups that would like to testify on this. And if you could be pretty brief, we're now, we have probably about a half an hour. And I'd like to vote on this before we're done.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I enjoyed the same second break as you did. I am Keith Kennedy, and I'm here on my own behalf. I don't represent anyone, although for your information, I serve on the Albany County Planning and Zoning Commission. you've heard before that this is specific to a certain instance elsewhere in Wyoming. And I would suggest that it is more broad than that. Recent experience that we had was with a subdivision request that complied with all rules, and due to its proximity to a municipality, the municipality commented and said, we believe that we can close a road because we don't like this development. However, and we passed and approved the subdivision because the landowner had an easement that preceded when that city street was dedicated as a city street. It lay on the same easement. And I would suggest it's a very similar case where a municipality was attempting to limit others' property rights by using other means and aside from the zoning regulation that applied to that property in the county. And I also think that you need to remember in the specific case that you've listened to, that the obligation of the landowner is to comply with the county's zoning ordinance, not what the city's zoning ordinance is. And with that, I'd welcome your questions.
Committee questions? And I think that is in part answers why we're taking a simple one-page bill and we're thoroughly going through it. The last time I was involved in a property rights issue, we worked on that, and it was a lot bigger one and broader, and it ended up being ruled unconstitutional by the court system, and we had to come back and rework it. And so we need to be careful when we're working these things.
Thank you,
Well,
Mr.
thank
Chairman.
you. And just to Jackson, this is why it isn't just about you. This is about the entire state of Wyoming. So we're not picking on Jackson specifically. It's just been brought to a head because of one case. Mr. Moline, come on forward. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brett Moline, Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation, sitting firmly in support of this bill. I do think the biggest issue is private property rights. I believe that there's been instances of taking, and I have to reiterate that this is not a single town issue. A very similar situation happened to the town just to the west of here. It was never resolved. The question still became, how much can the city do? I want to make sure this is plain. This is property that is outside the city limits. I think that's a very important aspect of this, is that this affects land outside the city limits. I believe that we need to protect the private property rights. If affordable housing is an issue, it's an issue in many communities. There's multitude of other ways to relieve that problem. With that, Mr. Chairman, trying to be as brief as possible, I would sit for any questions from the committee.
Questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Magagna, come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jim McGagnon with the Wyoming Stockholders Association. I won't repeat all the outstanding testimony you've heard about the private property nature of this. I just emphasize that and say that we fully agree with that. But as I've been sitting back here and listening to this, I've been reflecting on something else, and that is over the years, the many times that I've seen that you as a legislative body are put in the position of having to decide, are we attempting to pass legislation just to solve an individual constituent's problem? Or are we addressing a weakness or a loophole in our state statutory structure? I would contend that in this case, you are addressing a loophole that currently exists in that statutory structure. And for that reason, I would urge you to move forward with this bill. With that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Committee, Thank you, sir. Anyone else from the private sector? Representatives from private sector? So we have with us a couple of our distinguished representatives, and I'd like for both of you, if you, oh, Mike, if you don't want to, you don't have to come, but you also represent this area and you can give us some insight. And I think, so not only was Representative Schwartz he took a step down from into legislature from being a mayor, but he was a mayor of Jackson. He probably has another, correct? You were, weren't you?
Mr. Chairman, to be correct, no, I was not the mayor.
Oh,
if I may.
Boy, I have misunderstood. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, esteemed colleagues. No, I was a town planning commissioner for 2 years in Jackson. I was a county planning commissioner for 6 years. And then I was a county commissioner for 12.
All right, that's better yet.
Yeah. So, and when I came down here as a legislator, it was my firm hope that I would never have to deal with Teton County zoning controversies again, because I thought after 20 years that was plenty. But as some of you know, it is a recurring theme that Teton County and the town of Jackson zoning issues wind up coming down to the Wyoming legislature. So to start with, I think that's a problem, that I don't think we are the appropriate body to deal with what are essentially local zoning issues. We've heard conflicting testimony today from the town of Jackson and the applicant. I've heard from both of the parties individually. I'm not going to speculate on what has transpired. It's conflicting testimony. I'll leave it at that. My concern is that in passing, if this legislation passes, I'm not 100% sure what it actually would say can and can't be done, because we're looking at this strictly as deed restrictions for affordable housing, which is clearly affordable housing has been suggested by others is a problem in Teton County. I'm not sure what else this would limit municipalities in doing in terms of hookups to their water and sewer system. And I'll give an example. Within the city of Jackson, there's industrial zoning. And if an applicant comes in and wants to use either an excessive amount of water beyond what the city is comfortable with, or put effluent into the sewer system that is beyond the capacity of their system to handle, they can limit that. And whether or not that falls into the category of a deed restriction or strictly a condition of usage, I'm not 100% sure. But I think this is not something that we would want to restrict a municipality from being able to do. So I would exercise some caution. This bill came in very late in the session. You can tell by the number on it. I believe it's the final numbered bill that came out of the Senate. I don't know how much it's been vetted. I know that it is, we can say it's a statewide statute, but it is clearly the issue is in the city of Jackson and Teton County. I would urge caution.
And I guess.
And I would welcome questions.
Yeah. I would reply by, I came into this committee meeting believing that same thing, and I don't anymore. I think that it's a state, can become a statewide issue, and that so you're not being singled out is kind of my feel on it. Committee questions. Yeah, well, we'll start with questions for Representative Schwartz first, and then if you have further testimony, I won't leave you out, Mike. Yes, Representative Wharf.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I guess the question I have, my understanding is this property was actually zoned in 1990. Did deed restrictions exist then? And if If you can address the fact that it's already been zoned, is it appropriate now to come back and add deed restrictions to that as a condition of connecting to the sewer? Because that's what seems to be the problem in Jackson. And since you've been on the zoning, Mr. Chairman, I think that might be a good question for you to answer. Thank you.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Ward. So it gets a little complicated because there's been two applications. The first application involved land that, and like I said, I've been not doing this for a little while. My recollection is the portion that is the current application for was zoned in roughly 1992. There was a new comp plan done that I was involved in, and then regulations based on that comprehensive plan took place that made the zoning on the current application suburban, and I believe they conformed to that. The previous application included more property that, as I recall, is currently zoned rural but designated as appropriate for future zoning, which is a process that they are going through now to rezone that property. And it has not occurred yet. And that's the best I can answer that, if that answers your question.
Thank you,
Presently,
Mr.
it's-
Chairman. Yeah,
Go ahead.
I appreciate you trying to. I mean, it's probably not a fair question to ask you. I just know that you mentioned you'd been involved in that process. And to me, it just seems like we're trying to add conditions that weren't there when it was approved in 1992. But I just, maybe you didn't answer the question. I don't know.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, Representative Wharf, I don't believe there is anyone demanding a requirement for deed restricted housing in the current application. I think that conversation was with the previous application. And now that this one has been approved, my understanding is they now have to go through the city of Jackson to get the hookup. And I am unaware that the city has said, in order to hook up, you need to provide any affordable or workforce housing. It's like I said, there's conflicting testimony. And my understanding is no requirement has been made to get the hookup. You have to provide deed restricted housing.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, I guess my question is, could that deed restriction be put in this late in the day? To me, if it was zoned in 1992, to now come back and add some type of a deed restriction as they attempt to connect to the sewer, that seems problematic to me. But is that something that the municipalities can do under the current law?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Wharf, I don't think so. And as I said, I don't believe anyone is trying to do that.
Is the zoning a city deal or is it a county deal? Or both?
Mr. Chairman, the zoning on this property is county zoning because the land
That's what I
lies
thought.
outside of the municipal boundary.
Okay. Representative Fortner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Swartz, this is not, we started out, I guess we probably started out as this being a Teton County problem, but it's evolved into much more than that. It's a state, this is going to affect the state, and that's why we're walking on eggshells. You know, we've listened to testimony that's a lot of this has come down, private property rights has come down from the US Supreme Court and stuff. So there's no doubt it's going to affect the rest of the state. You know, we passed this. And basically it's like one person testified just minutes ago that we're going to plug a loophole. If we go down that road, you know, we're going to make standards that's set in stone. That's why we're going slow on this. We're not picking on Teton County at all. We're weighing everything out real cautious and carefully, as cautious as we can, because we know it's going to affect future generations from here on out. The decisions we make here, every one of them is that way. So with that, that's I want to end. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, you may.
when I was a planning commissioner, one of the first things they taught me was Nolan and Dolan. And I think everybody in Teton County does everything they can to make sure that our zoning regulations conform to Supreme Court decisions and constitutionality and the protection of property rights. My concern here is what constitutes a deed restriction? And we are talking about it strictly in terms of affordable housing, but I don't know what else constitutes a deed restriction in terms of what conditions are put on the use of a property in terms of its relationship to public utilities. And we haven't had anybody discuss that here today. And it makes me a little nervous to think that any municipality in the state of Wyoming would be constrained in protecting, in this case, its water and sewer system by this statute. And I can't answer that question.
Okay. Representative Yin, can you add?
Chairman Eklund, House Agriculture, thank you for taking my testimony. You know what, I've never been a county commissioner, never been on the town council, so I can't really speak to the zoning and planning portion. What I do want to speak to is the message that this bill sends. I am a little disappointed. So I represent most of the town of Jackson, so the borders of the town, not all of it, but much of it. And I am a little disappointed that the developer didn't decide to have me as part of the conversation before the bill got brought. But the thoughts that I have is that we're intervening in a process in the middle of a process instead of necessarily, I think the legislature often decides an outcome that may have been bad after the process is done. We'll bring a bill to fix it so that doesn't happen again. When we intervene in the middle of a process where we haven't had a negative outcome necessarily yet, we're putting our thumbs on the scale for one side or the other before the process has even finished taking place. And that's my worry. So if we deal with this bill, pass it through, we say to any developer necessarily that is in the process of doing some sort of development with a town or county, that, you know what, I don't necessarily agree with what the town and county is doing while we're in the middle of the process. So I'm going to bring a bill and push to put my finger on the scale before the process is even finished. So what I would say to the committee is that I worry that this bill sets a precedent where we'll start allowing people to bring bills to the legislature before we even come to any conclusion at all. And I think that's a worrisome precedent to set. And I'm happy to answer any questions, but I do think that the legislature intervening beforehand is not necessarily the right place that we want to go, because I think it'll encourage more bills in the future where the process hasn't been finished, and it could come to a good outcome, but we're encouraging a negative outcome before we even start, which I don't think is the right way to go. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Questions?
Sure.
And limited questions. We don't have much time. Go ahead, Representative.
Thank you,
Black.
Mr. Chairman. Representative Ying, does it concern you that this process started like last July, I think the testimony was? Does that concern you at all?
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to necessarily comment on how long any particular project takes. I think that in Teton County, as we've heard many times, we have a very small amount of private land. So proper planning to make sure that land gets developed in a way that is best for everyone in the town and county is really important. And sometimes that takes time, and sometimes it doesn't take as much time. It really just depends on the scale of the process, I think.
Well, I guess specific to it though, we're talking about land that is part of the county and town. And we're trying to deal with what the municipality has done. So any other questions? Okay. I would like for the bringer of the bill to go ahead and bring us home before we quickly as you can.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, committee. Great hearing on this piece of legislation. And I think after hearing the testimony we've heard, I'm even more convinced that this bill is needed now more than ever before. Because hearing the city's kind of hem and haw and not really answer direct questions about, what they're doing. Oh, I have to defer to this, I have to defer to that. This just clarifies that they don't have the power to zone on a utility hookup. If they've met all the other conditions, this is just a very much needed clarification to existing law within the public improvement statute. That just says, you can't put restrictions that are allowed under applicable zoning laws. You've already zoned it. You've already set the rules. You can't move the goalposts halfway through the game and say, oh, by the way, normally we give you guys, anybody that meets the capacity requirements for sewer, we give a permit. That's their job. Okay, they look at it. Okay, does this meet the capacity requirements? Boom, you got your permit. Now we're taking this permitting process or giving you a permit and they're putting all these strings attached to it based on, how you can develop your property. And that's wrong. And that's a policy decision that we need to make here in the legislature that does affect the whole state. And this situation has opened up our eyes as to a glaring loophole in the law that needs to be addressed, that these municipalities are trying to exercise power that they don't have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions? Okay. I believe we'll close testimony.
Move the bill, Mr. Chairman.
Been moved by Larson and seconded by Fortner. Oh, I'm sorry. Didn't mean to slide anyone, but okay. Discussion on the bill. Okay, I guess I would have a little bit. So as I thought about it, I was wondering if we could move the date on the bill. And I don't think it's imperative that we do that. By the time this bill is signed, we'll be into April sometime. It depends on if it were to pass the House and it'd go to the governor's desk, he'd look it over and it would take maybe till the middle of April, but possibly would be done immediately. The hearing set by the city of Casper is May 3rd. We've had indications from the city of Casper that they see no reason why they would put deed restrictions on or on a land that's outside of the. What did I say? Casper. Whoops. Okay. I didn't mean to do that, but it could be any city in the state. It is what we've discovered in this whole thing. So I'm not going to change it at all. I think that the way it stands, it would still give everybody time to come to an agreement. And I don't believe it puts any restriction on the city of Jackson or any other town in the state. I'm glad Mayor Collins was here because we're going to be dealing with it a lot in Cheyenne. There's just some unbelievable growth that's happening and subdivisions that are coming in. We have to have an understanding of what private property rights people have in the zoning that's been done previously. So any other discussion on the bill?
Question on the bill.
Question called, roll call, please.
Representative Blackburn.
Aye.
Vice Chair Clausen.
Aye.
Representative Fortner.
Aye.
Representative Heiner.
Aye.
Representative Larson.
Aye.
There's been an absentee vote from Representative Western of aye. Representative Wharf.
Aye.
Representative Winter.
Aye.
Chairman Eklund.
Aye.
That would be 9 ayes do pass.
Okay. We're not going to start into the next bill, but I'd like to talk to the committee for a minute. He's got to go. And thank you for sticking around. This next bill we work on is really an interesting one. And my name's on it. It differs from some of the other things we've done because we're going to try to pattern an ag authority after what we've already done with the pipeline authority that turned into the energy authority. Any beforehand, any research that you can do on how those operate and how we need to design this bill and any changes we need to do would be helpful. So a little bit of study before Thursday, and we'll work it on Thursday. Thank you. Committee, we're adjourned.